Hello everyone and welcome. On our recent episode of the 𝐓𝐼𝐬𝐭𝐭𝐞𝐫, our Zelda podcast, Daniel and I began covering a few different theories and ideas for Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, when he mentioned something that has completely changed my mind on the potential of the Zonai. And I am now convinced more than ever the Zonai will have a much larger role in Breath of the Wild 2. Comment below and let me know what you all think. Let me explain exactly what I mean, and we'll get into a few interviews about Breath of the Wild 2, and other Zelda games that now have me convinced. If you're a fan of videos like this, please give this video a like and subscribe. We will be reading off some of the comments you leave on this video during our next episode of the 𝐓𝐼𝐬𝐭𝐭𝐞𝐫, to not just get an overall idea of what the Zelda community thinks of the Zonai, but of their potential of being explored in the sequel. During the original Breath of the Wild, the Zonai were mentioned as an ancient race that mysteriously disappeared. This isn't anything new to the Zelda series. A lot of Zelda games, especially the 3D games, each have their own ancient mysterious tribe or race that is mentioned once or twice and then seemingly completely forgotten about. They are literally created filling in backstory for a mysterious object or just a bit of lore. They are created for the sole purpose of being mysterious, and Nintendo purposefully leaves it that way, with absolutely no intentions on clearing up any confusion or giving more information on them in later games. Twilight Princess had the interlopers and the ancient sky race that became the Uku. Majora's Mask had the ancient tribe that created, well, Majora's Mask, as well as the kingdom or country just outside of Termina and next to Icona, who the Icona kingdom went to war with, and is the reason everyone's basically a skeleton there. Skyward Sword had its own ancient advanced civilization from a time before Skyloft even rose from the ground. If you count it, Ocarina of Time and other games have the Sheikah. Usually we are only left with a single member, if any at all, and we didn't even get a game that really focused on them until Breath of the Wild. And of course there are several other races throughout the Zelda series as well. Minish Cap having another one of my favorite mysterious races. So while the Zonai were interesting, just as any of these other advanced, mysterious, and possibly magical races or tribes are, I just thought that was it. Just like the previous races, the Zonai were only created to simply be this game's version of that ancient mysterious race, used to flesh out the world a little bit more, and give it a bit of mystery. That's it. And, just like the others, I thought Nintendo had no intentions of giving us more details on them. We had a few different items, statues, and other stuff many believed could be connected to the Zonai, and many people were hoping Nintendo would give us DLC connected to them. However, that wasn't the case. Then, when Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity was announced, and took place in the past, fans were hoping it would reveal a bit more about the Zonai. This didn't happen either. Then, with Breath of the Wild 2's announcement and its eventual trailers, fans again began speculating about the Zonai. However, I still didn't think Nintendo would give us much more info about them. After all, they said several times that Breath of the Wild 2 began as just DLC for the original game, but became so large they decided to make it into its own game. And we know that most of the DLC came from ideas or concepts created for the original game that went unused. We can see many of these examples within the book Creating a Champion, with the most prominent being the Master Cycle concept artwork. We also know a lot of what we see in Breath of the Wild 2 trailers comes from the same concept images as well, specifically the return of Ganondorf, as well as the floating islands. This dragon head item attached to Link's shield, which used to be attached directly to his hand, Link losing his hand or arm, or something just happening to it, losing or breaking the Master Sword, and we can find several other connections throughout the book, or concept art released during the many interviews. And the one thing we never really got any concept art of was the Zonai. Even in the books that Nintendo used to explain an insane amount of details from Breath of the Wild, including the history of basically every race, area, shrine, divine beast, weapon, outfit, gear, literally everything, including many things that didn't even make it into the games. The one thing they didn't really explain was the Zonai. Again, because they probably created them for the sole purpose of being this game's ancient mysterious race, and nothing more, with no intentions of explaining them. After all, it also has the benefit of keeping fans talking about them for years to come, as well as fueling second, third, fourth, and countless other playthroughs of the game from fans trying to search for every single detail on the Zonai as they can, just as they did with the mysteries of Majora's Mask and other games. Plus, with it left a mystery, Nintendo could use them to explain almost anything that doesn't quite fit into the story, or that they can't explain in another way. They can just use this ancient race we know nothing about as a plot device. Then, Daniel brought up an interview from Aonuma that we covered long ago, and that we've mentioned in a few other videos. Aonuma stated one of the major changes made during development of Breath of the Wild was due to the overwhelming interests fans had for the Guardian shown off during the original gameplay teaser. It was meant to be just another enemy. However, due to fans liking it so much, and how popular the discussions on the enemy had become, they decided to change them from being just another enemy to being a key part of the overall story. A lot of people wrongly state that Nintendo never listens to fans. We've even seen websites who have had in-person interviews with Aonuma and others at Nintendo, where they have said or mentioned many examples of them completely changing a game based off of fan feedback, even if it were already in development. Yet those exact same websites still wrongly state this. Off the top of my head, some of the biggest examples are Wind Waker 2 being cancelled, and despite Aonuma, Miyamoto, and others at Nintendo absolutely loving the cartoony art style, because of fan feedback, they ended up creating the more realistic Twilight Princess, even though it meant Twilight Princess took almost twice as long than they believed it would take them to finish the sequel to Wind Waker. Breath of the Wild's giant open world came from complaints from fans about Skyward Sword not having an open connected world. We also seen them get rid of motion control, which they stated in multiple interviews after Skyward Sword would be the future of the Zelda series, that they couldn't imagine going back to normal controls after the breakthrough they had with one-to-one motion controls thanks to Skyward Sword. Yet, that was the only game that we had motion controls like that, because they listened to what fans wanted. Nintendo was aware of fans wanting to explore Breath of the Wild's Hyrule from 100 years ago. How many people begged for this to be in the DLC? And we ended up getting Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. There are dozens and dozens of various interviews you can find on topics like this. So with all of this, it is a very, very strong possibility for Breath of the Wild 2 to also take inspiration from fan feedback or suggestions. The ancient mysterious race that Nintendo may or may not have just meant to leave as one of the many ancient mysterious races and move on from could end up having a much larger role in Breath of the Wild 2, or at the very least, being more fleshed out in diaries or by characters.